previous conversation from December 27, 2024, I reminded my concerns about the growing unease and fear that seemed to be spreading. Unfortunately, those concerns became all too real in recent days as we witnessed devastating airplane accidents and terrorist attacks. Some say these events were mere coincidence, but I believe there's a deeper, more sinister force at play. Forces operating above the reach of governments, manipulating events for their own nefarious ends. Meanwhile, here in Indonesia, my listeners might recall the Mako Brimob Depot attack from 2018. It was a grim moment in our nation's history, showcasing the brutal tactics characteristic of Indonesian terrorist acts. These incidents serve as stark reminders that when one group is provoked, others are quick to follow suit. More often than not, they act based on deeply ingrained ideologies and personal motivations rather than financial gain like Islamic State. Despite efforts to disband groups like Jemaah Islamiyah, remnants still linger within our communities. I hope that the remaining members do not pose a further threat. Today's podcast is dedicated to exploring questions and shedding light on the latest terrorism events in Indonesia. Stay tuned, and above all, stay safe.
All right, let's get right into it with this intel briefing. We're going to be taking a look at some recent counterterrorism activities in Indonesia. It's the end of the year, and there's been a lot going on, so we're going to focus on a couple of recent developments that are pretty relevant to our work. Specifically, we'll be looking at Densus 88 activities and some key pronouncements made by the Kapolri recently.
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me here is even with the JI disbandment sort of taking all the headlines, the operational tempo of Densus 88 really hasn't slowed down at all. They're still very active, and these recent arrests, I think, give us a pretty good snapshot of what threats they're most focused on right now.
So let's break down those arrests. They really do span the archipelago, so we'll go through them chronologically. First up on December 23rd in Puncak, Bogor. Densus 88 arrested the leader of an Islamic boarding school. This individual was actually a wanted figure with connections to the JAD network in Cilacap.
That connection to JAD is, that's definitely significant. They've been a pretty persistent threat, and this arrest just kind of suggests ongoing activity within their network. And one other thing that stood out to me, the village head in that area actually reported that this individual had very limited interaction with locals, which, could point to an attempt at operational security, or even maybe a deliberate isolation as a tactic.
Interesting. Just a few days later, on December 27th, Densus 88 conducted an operation in Tasikmalaya, arresting a teacher. And I think what's interesting about this particular case is the variety of evidence they seized from the suspect's house. We're talking 3 bags, containing a pistol, ammunition, radical books, even a pen shaped like a weapon.
Yeah, that's pretty striking, the diversity of the items. I think it just reminds us of the creativity and resourcefulness that we see in these networks. And the fact that his wife is also a teacher and pretty active in the community, that adds another layer of complexity here. It really underscores the challenges we face in trying to identify individuals who may be involved in extremist activities, especially when they're kind of embedded in these seemingly normal social structures.
And get this, on that same day, December 27th, Densus 88 raided a house in Sukabumi, and it turned out to be connected to the suspect who had been arrested earlier that day in Tasikmalaya. They confiscated 32 pieces of evidence from this location, which further strengthens that link between the two individuals.
Wow. And to make things even more interesting, later that same day, 4 more individuals were arrested in Majalengka, and the police specifically stated that these arrests were connected to the network in Tasikmalaya. So we might be looking at a network that actually spans multiple regions here, with individuals playing different roles within the organization.
It's like they're putting together a puzzle, uncovering these connections and mapping out the network piece by piece. And then we have 2 more arrests to consider, both outside of Java. One took place in Halmahera Tengah, and the suspect in this case is linked to the bomb-making incident in Bandung.
Okay, so that connection to the Bandung incident, that raises the stakes quite a bit because it suggests a link to an actual attack. And then the other arrest, which took place in central Maluku, involved an individual who is connected to a foiled bomb attack in Ambon, and he's associated with the Eastern Indonesia Mujahideen group. which really just reminds us that the threat we face is not limited to Java or even just to JAD.
It seems like we're seeing a bit of a resurgence in activity from Eastern Indonesia Mujahideen. They've been relatively quiet for a while, but this foiled attack and then the arrest that followed suggests that they're still operational and still capable of planning and carrying out attacks.
Oh, absolutely. And it's crucial for us to remember that each of these groups, while they may share some ideological similarities, they really operate within their own specific contexts. They have their own histories, their own grievances, networks, and modus operandi.
Okay, so speaking of broader context, let's shift gears for a moment to the Kapolri's end-of-year announcements. He highlighted some pretty important developments on the counterterrorism front, including BNPT's efforts to counter online radicalization.
Right. So the BNPT reported that they actually blocked a staggering 180,954 pieces of online content promoting intolerance, radicalism, extremism, and terrorism in 2024. That number really just kind of highlights the sheer scale of this problem that we're facing online and the scope of BNPT's efforts to combat it.
Wow, that's an incredible number. It really highlights how the battleground has really shifted online in many ways. Do we know anything about where the majority of that content originated?
Yeah, according to the BNPT, a lot of it came from ISIS, HTI, and JAD networks. So we're seeing a mix of international and domestic influences in this online space.
So this proactive approach to countering online radicalization, it seems to be a key part of the Indonesian government's strategy moving forward. And it seems to be in line with President Joko Widodo's vision for Indonesia. So we're seeing a real concerted effort across multiple levels of government.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're recognizing
Yeah.
that this is a critical battlefront. And, while the disbandment of JI was a major victory, these online networks are going to continue to pose a significant threat, especially when it comes to radicalizing and recruiting individuals.
Right. And then there's the ongoing Operation Manago Raya in central Sulawesi, which the Kapolri announced would be extended through March 31st, 2025.
Yeah, that extension tells us that the threat in central Sulawesi is definitely far from over. It seems that they're committed to maintaining security and preventing the spread of radical ideologies in the region, which has historically been a hotbed for extremist activity.
It seems like they're really taking a multi-pronged approach, combining hard power tactics like arrests and raids with these softer approaches like online content blocking and rehabilitation programs for former extremists.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about disrupting those existing networks and preventing future attacks. It's also about trying to address the root causes of radicalization, offering these alternative pathways for individuals who might be susceptible to these extremist ideologies.
Right, and that brings us to the BNPT's work with former JI members. They've been providing national insight training, entrepreneurship programs, and a whole range of other initiatives designed to help reintegrate these individuals back into society.
It's really interesting what they're doing here because they're not just focusing on de-radicalization, they're also focusing on providing these practical skills and opportunities that can help these individuals build new lives and actually contribute to their communities in a positive way.
Yeah, it's almost like they're trying to dismantle the narrative that drew these individuals to JI in the first place.
Yeah.
And kind of replace it with a more positive and constructive vision for the future.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about shifting mindsets, creating a sense of belonging that's rooted in something other than this extremist ideology. But, while those efforts with JI are definitely promising, we can't overlook the persistent threat from other groups, as we saw with that arrest related to the foiled bomb attack in Ambon.
Right, that case involving Eastern Indonesia Mujahideen. It's a stark reminder that this threat landscape is constantly evolving. Even as JI fades from the picture, other groups are still active. And they're still capable of carrying out attacks.
Exactly. It really underscores the importance of understanding these regional nuances of the threat,
Yeah.
Each group operates within its own specific context, with its own history, its own grievances and motivations, so we really can't afford to adopt this one-size-fits-all approach to counterterrorism.
That's like a game of whack-a-mole,
Mhm.
You might suppress one group, but then another one could pop up somewhere else, exploiting different vulnerabilities.
And adopting new tactics. Precisely. And that's why it's absolutely crucial for us to stay ahead of the curve, constantly analyzing trends, identifying potential threats, and adapting our strategies accordingly.
So looking at everything we've discussed so far, what are some of the key takeaways that we need to be focusing on as we move into 2025?
Well, I think first and foremost, We need to recognize that this threat is multifaceted and geographically dispersed. We've seen arrests connected to various networks across the entire archipelago, and that really indicates this persistent and evolving threat landscape that we have to contend with.
And we can't ignore the online dimension either. The sheer volume of content blocked by the BMPT just really highlights the importance of countering online radicalization and the need for ongoing vigilance in the online domain.
Absolutely. And, BMPT's efforts to reintegrate former JI members, those are also really crucial. If those efforts are successful, it could serve as a model for other countries grappling with similar challenges.
It's an intriguing experiment, for sure.
Yeah.
And the outcome could have far-reaching implications for counterterrorism strategies around the world.
Yeah, but it's also important to note that it's a long-term endeavor, and it's really too early to say whether it will be truly effective in preventing recidivism and really disrupting that cycle of radicalization.
That brings us to a really crucial question then. Given the disbandment of JI and this increasing focus on rehabilitation,
Yeah.
what new challenges might emerge in the Indonesian counterterrorism landscape in 2025? I mean, will we see new groups kind of emerge and try to fill that void left by JI? Or will existing groups like JAD try to capitalize on this whole situation?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a possibility. We also have to consider whether the tactics and the targets themselves might evolve. Will we see a shift towards lone wolf attacks, maybe inspired by online propaganda, perhaps targeting softer targets or utilizing new technologies?
And how can counter-messaging strategies really keep pace with all these advancements in technology? I mean, can we anticipate the use of AI or the dark web to spread radical content? And how do we even begin to prepare for those sorts of challenges?
It really is a constant cat and mouse game, and we need to be agile and innovative in our approach. I think one thing that we should definitely be watching closely is whether Indonesia's focus on de-radicalization and reintegration will actually prove to be successful in the long run.
Right, and if it is successful, could it actually serve as a model for other countries who are also grappling with similar challenges? It could have ripple effects far beyond Indonesia's borders.
Absolutely. It has the potential to really reshape global approaches to counterterrorism. But even if it is successful domestically, there's always that risk of these ideologies spreading transnationally, inspiring individuals and groups in other parts of the world.
So it seems like we're left with more questions than answers as we head into this new year. But I guess that's just the nature of the work, isn't it?
It really is. We just need to remain vigilant, adaptable, and constantly seeking out new knowledge to try to stay ahead of this ever-evolving threat.
Well, you've given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners as well. Stay vigilant out there, everyone.